Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are very happy to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. Daniel stared at his phone screen, reading the message his wife Emma had just sent. Come home early tonight. I have a surprise for you. He felt a hint of curiosity, but didn't think much of it. As a sales manager at a medical equipment company in Buenos Aires, Argentina, he was accustomed to handling all kinds of unexpected situations. He still had two important clients to visit that afternoon, so Emma's surprise would have to wait until evening. As the car drove through the busy streets of Buenos Aires, Daniel's thoughts drifted back to the night 6 years ago when he met Emma. She had just arrived in Argentina from Madrid, Spain, and was teaching Spanish literature at an international school. They met at a party hosted by a friend, and Emma's enthusiasm and passion for literature immediately attracted him. A year later, they held a small but beautiful wedding and began their life together. Daniel wasn't a workaholic, but he was certainly dedicated to his career. As a sales manager for a medical equipment company, he was responsible for establishing connections with hospitals and clinics throughout Argentina. This job sometimes required him to travel for several days, but he always tried to balance work and family life. Each time he returned home, he would bring local specialties or gifts that Emma loved. Emma, meanwhile, continued teaching at the international school, building her own career and social circle. The car radio was broadcasting local news, but Daniel wasn't listening. His thoughts were interrupted by a memory from 3 years ago. After 2 years of marriage, Emma had started suggesting they have a child. Daniel remembered how he had stammered in response that night, how skillfully he had changed the subject. He had never told Emma that during his teenage years, a serious mumps complication had left him sterile. The doctors had clearly told him and his parents at the time that he would never be able to have biological children of his own. This secret became a heavy stone in Daniel's heart. Every time Emma mentioned the topic of children, he felt a wave of panic and shame. He feared losing her, feared seeing disappointment in her eyes. So he postponed, made excuses, said their careers were on the rise, that they should enjoy their time together first. Emma, though disappointed, understood and accepted these reasons. Or at least, he thought she had. The last client took longer than expected, and when Daniel finally drove home, night had already fallen over Buenos Aires. He parked the car, noticing that all the lights in the apartment were on. Opening the door, he smelled a familiar aroma. Emma had made his favorite Argentine grilled meat. "I'm home," Daniel called out, putting down his briefcase and walking toward the kitchen. Emma stood there in a beautiful dark blue dress, pouring red wine into 2 glasses. Seeing Daniel come in, she flashed a bright smile. "You're back," Emma said, coming over to give him a hug and a sweet kiss. "How was your day?" "Busy but good. The last client was a bit difficult, but we finally reached an agreement." Daniel took the wine glass Emma offered him. "So, what's this surprise?" Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. She took a deep breath and said, "Daniel, I'm pregnant." Daniel felt the world stop turning in that moment. His hand trembled slightly, almost spilling the wine glass he was holding. He knew this was impossible, absolutely impossible, unless he forced himself to smile, but his thoughts had already plunged into chaos. "Really? That's amazing," he heard his own voice say. Emma seemed not to notice his abnormal reaction, or she chose to ignore it. She continued talking excitedly, saying she was already 8 weeks pregnant, how she had secretly gone to see a doctor, wanting to give him a surprise. Daniel nodded mechanically, holding back the internal shock and pain, pretending to be happy. He knew this child couldn't be his. But at this moment, he needed time to think, needed to calm down. "I don't know what to say," he finally said, with a tremor in his voice he could barely hide. "We're finally going to be parents." That night, after Emma fell asleep, Daniel sat alone on the balcony, gazing at the night view of Buenos Aires. His world had collapsed in a matter of hours. He knew Emma had betrayed him, but he didn't know with whom or how long it had been going on. He needed to find out the truth, but more importantly, he needed to decide how to face this betrayal. In the following days, Daniel began to notice details he had previously ignored. Emma's phone was always password locked, and lately she often worked late. Her social media behavior had also changed, frequently checking messages but never showing them to him. One Saturday morning, Emma told Daniel she needed to go to school to prepare some teaching materials. This gave him an opportunity. He decided to follow her, to see where she was really going. Keeping a safe distance, he watched Emma's car drive not toward the school, but toward a luxury apartment area on the other side of the city. Daniel stopped across the street, watching Emma walk into a modern apartment building. He felt his heart being squeezed by an invisible hand. He took out his phone, took pictures of the building and Emma's car, and waited. 2 hours later, when Emma walked out of the apartment building, she looked radiant, with a kind of satisfied smile on her face that Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. After some investigation, Daniel learned that the apartment belonged to Javier, an art history professor recently hired at Emma's school. He was a few years older than Daniel, divorced, and had a certain reputation in the academic world. Daniel began to gather more information, checking Emma's social media, noting increased interactions with Javier, and finding several photos of her with the new professor at school events. A week later, Daniel took a day off and drove to the international school where Emma worked. He told the receptionist he was bringing lunch for his wife, then quietly walked to the teacher's lounge. Through the half-open door, he saw Emma and a man, presumably Javier, sitting in a corner, very close together, chatting happily. When Javier's hand gently covered Emma's, and she not only didn't resist, but responded with a tender smile, Daniel felt a wave of nausea. Back home, Daniel began to sort through the information he had. Through Emma's schedule and her working late times, he discovered this affair had probably been going on for at least 4 months. It was right around that time that Emma began mentioning wanting children again, and this time she seemed particularly insistent. Daniel decided to continue pretending, to act as always. He wanted to learn more, wanted to understand what Emma was thinking, why she was deceiving him like this. Every night, as he pretended to be excited about the coming baby, discussing nursery decorations and baby item purchases, his heart was bleeding internally. 3 weeks later, Emma's early pregnancy symptoms began to show. Every morning, Daniel would hear the sounds of her vomiting in the bathroom. Then he would prepare breakfast, hand her a glass of warm water, acting like an attentive husband. But each time he saw her caressing her still flat stomach, talking to herself in the mirror, saying, "Our baby," Daniel felt intense pain and anger. One evening, as they were having dinner together, Emma suddenly said, "I was thinking, maybe we should do a genetic disease test, you know, the kind that can detect hereditary diseases in advance. My father's family has a history of heart problems. I'm worried." Daniel looked at her, thinking this was the moment he had been waiting for. "Good idea," he said calmly. "But before that, I have a question to ask you." Emma raised her head. A flash of unease passed through her eyes, but she quickly regained composure. "What question? Whose child is it, Emma?" The question echoed in the dining room. Emma's face instantly turned pale. The fork in her hand fell onto the plate, making a harsh sound. "What are you talking about?" "Of course it's yours." She tried to keep her voice steady, but visibly failed. Daniel took a deep breath, controlling his emotions. "No more lies. I know about you and Javier. I know how many times you've gone to his apartment. I know how you interact at school." He paused, watching Emma's expression change from shock to fear. "But most importantly, I know this baby cannot be mine." Emma's tears began to fall, but Daniel wasn't sure if they were due to remorse or fear of being discovered. "How do you know?" she finally asked, trembling. "Because I'm sterile, Emma." Daniel calmly revealed his secret kept for years. "I had mumps at 17, and complications made me infertile. The doctors said my condition was permanent." Emma's eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked completely devastated by this information. "So when you told me you were pregnant, and the baby was mine, I knew it was a lie," Daniel continued, his voice filled with controlled anger. "I gave you many chances to tell me the truth, but you chose to keep lying." Emma began to sob, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't know you, I thought." She tried to organize her words, but failed. "You thought what, Emma? That I would believe this obvious lie? That I would happily accept another man's child?" Daniel's voice began to rise, though he tried to stay calm. "Or did you simply not think about the consequences, only caring about satisfying your own desires?" Emma raised her head, eyes swollen. "Daniel, I love you, I really do. But we've been talking about having children for a long time, and you always found excuses to postpone. I thought you were just afraid, or not ready enough. I never knew you couldn't. So that's your reason for cheating? Because you wanted a child and I couldn't give you one." Daniel interrupted, feeling an intense sense of betrayal. If you really loved me, you would have talked to me about this problem instead of going behind my back to find another man. Emma couldn't refute. She lowered her head, tears falling onto the table. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know this can't make up for what I did, but I truly am sorry. Daniel stood up, feeling a wave of fatigue and emptiness. I need time to think, he said. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. Before leaving the dining room, he turned to take one last look at Emma. She seemed so small and fragile, but Daniel knew now he had to think of himself. This lie, this betrayal, had changed everything. He didn't know if he could forgive her or if their marriage had any chance of being saved. But one thing he was certain of, he would never be deceived again. The next morning, when Daniel woke up, he felt a sense of unreality. Last night's confrontation seemed like a nightmare, but when he walked out of the guest room and saw Emma's swollen eyes and haggard face, he knew it was all real. She had betrayed him, and he had revealed his long-kept secret. We need to talk, Daniel said calmly, sitting at the table. Emma nodded, fear and worry in her eyes. She carefully sat across from him, her fingers nervously intertwined. First, said Daniel, I want to know the whole truth. No more lies, no more concealment. I want to know when your affair with Javier began, why it began, and what this relationship means to you. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. It started 4 months ago, she admitted quietly. When Javier first came to the school, we were assigned to organize the school's cultural festival activities together. We discovered we had a lot in common, both loving literature and art. She paused, as if searching for the right words. At first it was just friendship, but as time went on, we started sharing more personal things. I told him about how we always wanted children, but you always postponed. So he sympathized with you, became your confidant, and then took the opportunity to push the relationship to a deeper level. Daniel said sarcastically. Emma shook her head. It wasn't like that. He didn't manipulate or use me. I'm responsible too. I was attracted to his attention and understanding. When he invited me to his apartment to see his collection of rare editions of literary works, I should have refused, but I didn't. Daniel felt a twist in his stomach. He imagined Emma walking into that stranger's apartment. Imagined the time they spent together, and it made him feel sick. Do you love him? Daniel asked directly, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Emma hesitated. I don't know. I'm attracted to him. I enjoy the time we spend together. But I love you too, Daniel. I never thought about leaving you. And this baby? Daniel pointed to her stomach. What do you plan to do about it? Emma's eyes moistened again. I don't know. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I knew I should tell you the truth, but I was afraid of losing you. I thought maybe we could raise this child together, as part of our family. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. You really thought I would accept another man's child as my own? And based on a lie? I didn't know you were sterile, Emma defended. I thought. You thought you could deceive me for a lifetime, Daniel interrupted, his voice full of pain. Did you ever consider that the truth would eventually come to light? When this child grew up, maybe one day needed to have a medical examination and discovered that his blood type didn't match mine. Or even simpler, when he started looking more and more like Javier and not me. Emma lowered her head, speechless. Does Javier know about this baby? Daniel continued asking. Emma shook her head. Not yet. I'm not sure how to tell him. Daniel laughed coldly. So you not only deceived me, but also planned to deceive the child's biological father? Emma began to sob, but Daniel no longer had compassion. He stood up, walked to the window, looking at the city view. He needed to make a decision, and quickly. Listen, he finally turned to Emma and said, I need you to leave this apartment now. Go to your mother's, to a hotel, anywhere. But not here. I need space to think, need to decide what to do next. Emma looked shocked and hurt. Daniel, please, we can talk. We can find a solution. There's nothing to talk about now, Daniel said calmly. You betrayed me, Emma. You deceived me, planned to continue deceiving me. What I need now is time and space. Seeing that Emma wasn't moving, Daniel continued. If you don't leave now, I will. But I want you to know that, either way, this marriage is over. Emma finally stood up, tears streaming down her face. I'll pack some things, she said softly. But Daniel, please remember, whatever happened, I did truly love you. Daniel didn't respond. He stood silently, listening to the sounds of Emma packing in the bedroom, listening to her footsteps gradually fading away, listening to the sound of the front door closing. Then, he finally allowed himself to collapse. In the days that followed, Daniel's life was like that of a walking corpse. He took a week off, locked himself in the apartment, trying to clear his thoughts. He contacted a lawyer to understand the divorce procedure. In Argentina, no-fault divorce is possible, but he wanted to ensure his rights were protected in this process. Meanwhile, he decided to confront Javier. He needed to see what this man who had destroyed his marriage was like, needed him to know the consequences of his actions. Friday afternoon, Daniel drove to the international school. He knew Javier normally finished his last class at this time. He waited in the teacher's parking lot, and when he saw Javier walk out of the school's main door, he approached. "Javier," Daniel called calmly. Javier turned around, looking confused at this stranger. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "I'm Daniel, Emma's husband." Javier's face immediately paled. He looked left and right, as if seeking an escape route, but finally decided to face the situation. "Daniel, No, listen to me first," Daniel interrupted him, his voice low but filled with dread. "I know about you and my wife. I know she's pregnant with your child." Javier's eyes widened. "What? Emma is pregnant?" Daniel laughed coldly. "It seems she's kept things from you too." "Yes, she's pregnant, and the baby is yours. I'm sterile, so it's definitely not mine." Javier looked completely shocked. He leaned against a car, seeming to need support to stand. "I didn't know. She never mentioned it." "Of course not," Daniel said sarcastically, "because she planned to make me believe it was my child, raise a child of a man who didn't know." Javier shook his head, seeming to struggle to understand all this. "Daniel, I don't know what to say. I never intended to destroy your marriage. This just happened," Daniel said coldly. "Don't give me those cliches. You're an adult. You knew what you were doing. You had a relationship with a married woman. You must take responsibility for your actions." Javier looked directly into Daniel's eyes and nodded. "You're right. I have no excuses. I should have controlled my feelings and actions better." Daniel hadn't expected this direct admission and apology. He had originally expected denial or excuses. This calmed him a bit. "So what do you plan to do?" Daniel asked. "About this baby?" Javier took a deep breath. "If this baby is truly mine, I will take responsibility. I will provide financial support, participate in his or her life. But it all depends on what Emma wants." Daniel shook his head. "Not anymore. It's not just Emma's decision anymore. It concerns you too, concerns this unborn child." He paused. "I've decided to end my marriage with Emma. But I want you to know that this decision is not just because she cheated, but because she planned to build our future on lies." Javier nodded, a flash of guilt in his eyes. "I understand. I'm truly sorry things ended this way." Daniel turned to leave, but stopped. "One more thing, Javier. Does the school board know about your relationship with a married colleague? I believe this violates the school's professional ethics standards." Javier's face paled again. "Daniel, please don't. I've already written a letter detailing your relationship, including dates, places, and evidence," Daniel said. "But I haven't sent it yet. It depends on how you handle this situation from now on. If you take responsibility, if you do right by Emma and this baby, then I'll consider letting this letter never see the light of day." With that, Daniel left, leaving a stunned Javier standing in the parking lot. Back home, Daniel received several messages from Emma, begging him to meet, to talk about their future. But he had already made his decision. He replied that the lawyer would contact her to handle the divorce matters. However, Daniel didn't stop his plans. The next day, he contacted several members of the school board, arranging a private meeting. He didn't immediately reveal Emma and Javier's relationship, but expressed concerns about the school's professional environment, especially about how inappropriate relationships between teachers might affect students. After the meeting, he sent a message to Emma, asking her to meet at a cafe the next day. He needed to tell her his decision and plans in person. Emma arrived early at the cafe, and when Daniel walked in, she was already sitting in a corner, fingers nervously tapping on the table. Seeing him, her eyes lit up, full of hope. "Thank you for seeing me," Emma said, anxiety in her voice. "I've been thinking a lot, Daniel. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I hope we still have a chance." "There is no chance, Emma," Daniel calmly interrupted. "I've already contacted a lawyer and started the divorce process." Emma's face instantly paled. But Daniel, we can try to fix it. I can prove to you how much I love you, how much I regret. No, Daniel said, with finality in his voice. I can forgive many things, Emma. I can forgive your desire for a child. I can forgive your need to seek emotional connection. But what I cannot forgive are the lies. You plan to have me raise a child that isn't mine and make me believe it was my own flesh and blood. This kind of deception is unforgivable. Emma began to sob, but Daniel continued. There's something else you should know. I met with Javier. Emma raised her head, terror in her eyes. What did you do? Don't worry, we just talked, Daniel said. He now knows about the baby and seems willing to take responsibility. You had no right to tell him, Emma said angrily. That was my decision. Daniel laughed coldly. Just like making me believe that baby was mine was also your decision? No, Emma, when you chose to deceive me, you lost that right. Emma had no words, could only look at her hands. One more thing, Daniel continued. I've already spoken with the school board. I didn't specifically mention you and Javier, but expressed concern about inappropriate relationships between teachers. They're reviewing the school's professional ethics policy. Emma raised her head, fear in her eyes. Are you going to ruin my career? No, Daniel said. I'm just ensuring that actions have consequences. You and Javier chose betrayal and deception. You should both bear the consequences of these decisions. Emma's shoulders slumped, as if all strength had been drained from her. I'm really sorry, Daniel. I know this doesn't change anything, but I truly regret hurting you. Daniel looked at this woman who was once his beloved, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, even a hint of compassion. But the strongest feeling was that of release. Finally, no more lies, no more pretending. Goodbye, Emma, he finally said, standing to leave. I hope you and your child are well. Walking out of the cafe, Daniel took a deep breath of Buenos Aires fresh air. He felt an unprecedented lightness. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges, but at least now he could face it based on truth, not lies. 3 months later, the divorce proceedings were completed. Daniel decided to leave Buenos Aires, accepting a new position with the company in Córdoba. New city, new beginning. He heard that both Emma and Javier had been disciplined by the school for their relationship, though not fired. Their reputations were severely damaged. They seemed to be trying to establish some kind of relationship, preparing for the baby that was coming. That child had no connection to Daniel, but he hoped it would grow up based on truth, not lies. In his new home in Córdoba, Daniel began therapy, learning to handle his secrets and fears. For the first time, he fully accepted the fact that he couldn't have children and considered possible future options, such as adoption. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, Daniel would think of Emma, of the time they spent together. But these memories no longer brought intense pain, only a peaceful acceptance of the past. He knew that, whatever the future might bring, he had stood on the side of truth. And after living in a world of lies for so long, that was the greatest victory. 6 months after moving to Córdoba, Daniel met Valentina, a single mother, at a book club. Their relationship developed slowly, but was built on honesty and mutual respect. When Daniel revealed to her that he couldn't have children, she accepted this fact, telling him she already had a child she loved, and that the most important thing was to find someone to share life with. Watching Valentina and her daughter Sophia playing in the park, Daniel thought about life's irony. Once, Emma had tried to make him accept a child that wasn't his through lies. And now, through honesty and openness, he might have a family, one not based on deception. When Sophia ran to him, excited to show him a special leaf she had found, Daniel smiled and crouched down, listening intently as she explained why this leaf was so special. In that moment, he knew that truth, however difficult, is always the only path. If this story has resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content. We look forward to seeing you in another story.